Greetings at Cheating Story Lab. I once assumed that ambition and fidelity could thrive within a marriage. However, I've realized that some individuals' ambition encompasses betraying the one who consistently backed their career growth. My name is Brandon, and for 8 years, I shared my life with a woman I thought was my partner in constructing our future. Her name was Brooke, and she held a position in pharmaceutical corporate sales, a role demanding quarterly meetings, late client dinners, and strategic weekends. I never doubted her commitments. I admired her determination, appreciated her progression from entry-level rep to regional director within 6 years. I worked in civil engineering for the city, offering steady hours, reasonable pay, no glamour. 3 years into our union, we bought a suburban house, nothing lavish but cozy. Our strategy was straightforward: bolster our careers for another 5 years, then start a family. Brooke often expressed her desire to attain senior director status before starting a family. Over the past 2 years, conferences grew increasingly frequent, with Chicago in March, Miami in June, and San Diego in September. Each one ran for 4 to 5 days. Upon her return, Brooke was always exhausted yet reinvigorated, sharing new strategies, networking opportunities, and details about product launches. She'd share photos from team dinners, convention center presentations, and hotel lobbies bustling with pharmaceutical professionals. I never harbored doubts about her. During video calls from her hotel room, she'd voice complaints about tedious keynote speakers and send me screenshots of her conference schedules. Everything appeared legitimate until a Tuesday morning in October, when I found an unexpected promotional message in our email folder from a resort in Key West. The subject line read, "Thank you for your stay, Brooke." Although it seemed like spam, I hesitated before deleting it. However, Brooke hadn't been to Florida, as her last conference had taken place in Boston 2 weeks prior. The email discussed a couple's package. Upon opening it, the message thanked her for selecting their romantic oceanfront resort and invited her back for their winter couples retreat special. A picture of a sunset dinner setup on a private beach, champagne glasses, and rose petals were included, causing my stomach to chill. I spent several minutes scrutinizing the screen, searching for an innocent explanation. Perhaps it was a mix-up, an email intended for someone else with the same name, or maybe it was a personalized spam email. But the unease lingered. I examined our credit card statements, a task I had neglected for months as Brooke handled most of our finances. The Boston conference costs, hotel meals, airport parking fees, and typical business trip expenses were listed. However, a charge from 3 months back to a resort in Napa Valley stood out, $1,500 marked as personal on our joint card. Brooke had never spoken about going to Napa. That week, I was engrossed in a bridge inspection project, returning home each evening to an empty house as Brooke claimed to be attending a conference in Atlanta. I verified the dates. The Atlanta conference was legitimate, and I'd spoken with her there. However, the charge from Napa coincided with the same weekend. My hands trembled as I traced further back through our statements. Another resort charge in Santa Barbara 6 months prior, corresponding with a San Francisco conference she'd mentioned to me. A hotel in Scottsdale during an alleged Phoenix conference also showed on our joint account, revealing a pattern: real conferences in major cities paired with romantic trips to luxury resorts. These side excursions were concealed amidst genuine business expenses. To approach her without proper evidence would give her room for deception. I needed concrete proof before discussing it. So, I enlisted the help of a private investigator. Afternoon, Tucker Cross was a former detective who now ran his own firm, and I described my predicament to him, presenting him with credit card statements and an email. He neither condemned nor dismissed my suspicions. Instead, he promised to investigate. Within 3 days, Tucker presented his preliminary findings. Dennis Whitmore, aged 52, was Brooke's boss, married with 2 college-aged children, serving as vice president of the Northeast region in a pharmaceutical company. He had been there for 20 years. According to Tucker's checks through some corporate security contacts, Whitmore's travel schedule perfectly coincided with each of Brooke's conference trips. They frequently traveled together on the same flights and stayed at the same hotels. Moreover, their resort trips also reflected matching charges on Whitmore's corporate card. This deceptive relationship had been going on for at least 18 months, possibly even longer. Tucker provided me with photos he had taken over the past week as evidence. At a restaurant an hour away from our home, where Brooke and Whitmore were having lunch, a place she'd never brought me before. Leaving work at 9 p.m., they exited the office together, climbed into his car, and drove to a hotel near the airport. The photographs, time-stamped and dated, left no room for doubt. In Tucker's office, I stared at pictures of my wife laughing with another man, touching his arm, even kissing him in a parking garage. My hands went cold, my heart felt like it was trapped within iron bands that were gradually tightening. Tucker asked me what I intended to do. I considered challenging them, creating a scene, but that would only provide them time to align their stories, conceal evidence, and reduce the fallout. I pondered discussing the matter privately with Brooke, but she would certainly lie, leaving me without any power to expose her. Then I thought about the company expenses, specifically Whitmore's use of his corporate card for romantic escapades. That was fraudulent activity, theft. But with this new perspective, I knew my course of action had changed. I need records for everything, I stated. All trips, expenses, every instance of their meetings, and I want to understand the company's stance on personal travel. Tucker acknowledged with a nod. It will take another week. That week stretched like an eternity. Brooke returned home each evening discussing client presentations and sales goals, inquiring about my day, watching TV together, sharing a goodnight kiss. Each moment seemed like observing a stranger wearing my wife's visage. Sleep eluded me. When I managed to doze off, I dreamt of addressing her about various possible outcomes. Sometimes she wept and implored for forgiveness in my dreams, while at other times she chuckled and confessed she had never loved me. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, pulse racing, reminding myself that I hadn't confronted her yet. Tucker's comprehensive report landed in my encrypted inbox on a Friday morning. Over an 18-month period, records showed 12 distinct journeys taken by Brooke and Whitmore, which combined business seminars with vacations at luxury resorts. The expenses related to these resort stays, charged exclusively on Whitmore's corporate credit card, surpassed $45,000. Tucker obtained expense reports that indicated Whitmore had fraudulently classified couples' spa treatments as client entertainment and romantic dinners as business development meals. The company's ethics policy clearly stated that misappropriation of corporate funds exceeding $5,000 could lead to immediate termination and potential legal consequences. Furthermore, Tucker conducted a background check on Whitmore. His wife was Gretchen, married to Dennis for 26 years. Their daughter was a junior at Cornell, while their son had just graduated from Georgetown. They lived in a colonial house in an affluent suburb, with an estimated property value of $1.8 million, as per the photos compiled by Tucker. At a charity event, Gretchen smiled, yet my heart sank as I looked at graduation photos of children. It was not merely my marriage on the line. Whitmore, too, was harming his family, and his wife remained unaware. That afternoon, I made a choice some may call vengeful. I saw it as justice. I reached out to divorce lawyer Coleman Barrett, presenting all the evidence Tucker had amassed. After scrutinizing the documents, Barrett appeared unfazed before saying, "This is sufficient for charges of adultery and dissipation of marital assets, but the corporate fraud angle holds the real power." "What do you mean?" I inquired. His response, "Your wife engaged in expense fraud, using corporate funds to finance her personal romantic trips. If the company presses charges against Whitmore, she could be indicted as an accomplice. This implies not only losing her job, but also facing potential criminal prosecution." Pondering this, a part of me shuddered at the prospect of Brooke ending up in jail. However, another aspect within me, the part that couldn't sleep peacefully for a week, the part that had scrutinized the parking garage pictures, yearned for her to comprehend that each action provokes a reaction. I inquired about the schedule. "Can you submit divorce papers by Monday?" I inquired. "If you desire the greatest effect, though, I propose waiting until the moment of service can't be manipulated." A concept began to take shape. Brooke had another conference scheduled in 2 weeks. The destination was Denver, as far as I knew, for 4 days, Thursday through Sunday. I had glimpsed the schedule on her laptop. "What if I intended to serve her during the conference?" I asked. Coleman finally smiled. "That would certainly make an impression, but you'd need to locate her first." "I already know where she will be," I stated. I instructed Tucker to conduct another investigation. The Denver conference turned out to be genuine, a pharmaceutical industry summit at the downtown convention center. Tucked away in Whitmore's credit card transactions was a reservation at the private couple's resort, Serenity Springs, located 90 minutes from Denver in the mountains. The reservation was for a 4-night stay in their premier suite, coinciding with the conference dates. They had frequently taken such trips before, attending the conference for a day or two merely as an appearance, then escaping to the mountains for a romantic retreat. However, this time I had decided to attend. I took Thursday and Friday off work, informing my supervisor of a family emergency. I reserved a flight to Denver that arrived on Thursday afternoon. Tucker accompanied me, hoping to observe the confrontation should it become necessary in court later. Additionally, I invited one more person for this trip, Gretchen Whitmore. Contacting her was the most challenging aspect of the plan. She called me within an hour after I had sent her a Facebook message introducing myself and asking to discuss. She inquired, her voice trembling, "Is this concerning Dennis and your spouse?" I had suspected. "He's acted odd, distant." I discovered a receipt for jewelry I hadn't received, but I chose to dismiss it as paranoia. There was a pause. "Do you have evidence?" I shared a series of Tucker's photographs, not the most private ones. I wasn't unkind, but revealing enough. Images from hotel lobbies, restaurants, them holding hands entering a resort. She later called me back. 30 minutes later. "When will you confront him?" I planned to do so next Thursday in the mountains at a place named Serenity Springs. There was a lengthy silence then. "I'm joining you." So now there were 3 of us on a flight to Denver. Me, Tucker, and a pediatric nurse who had spent 26 years constructing a life with a man who had abandoned it for a woman nearing his daughter's age. We arrived at 3 p.m., rented an SUV, and journeyed into the mountains as the sun began to set behind snow-covered peaks. At Serenity Springs, a high-end couple's retreat, you'd find secluded cabins, a lavish main lodge housing a top-tier eatery, private hot tubs boasting panoramic mountain views, ideal for anniversary celebrations and honeymoons. Regrettably, this was the place my wife had been frequenting under the guise of attending pharmaceutical seminars in convention centers, while secretly meeting her boss. Tucker had made prior arrangements, confirming that Mr. Whitmore and his spouse had arrived earlier that day. Their dinner reservation at the resort restaurant was set for 7 p.m., and it was just past 6:45 when we stepped into the lodge. The establishment exuded a tranquil ambience with subdued lighting and refined sophistication, floor-to-ceiling windows displaying the breathtaking sunset over the mountains. Approximately 20 tables adorned with candles and fresh flowers, with soft melodies from a piano in the corner for background music. Brooke and Dennis were engrossed in laughter at a corner table, sharing glasses of wine. A fresh dress, a unique hairstyle for special events, it was clear she was dressed up. He had his hand on hers, they seemed content, almost enamored. Gretchen let out a sound between a gasp and a sob nearby. "Ready?" I asked. She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Let's proceed." We walked together, Tucker lingering at the entrance with his phone recording. The maitre d' attempted to intervene, but I dismissed him. Some patrons watched as we approached with purpose. Brooke spotted me first, and in quick succession her expression shifted from confusion, recognition, shock, and sheer terror. She dropped her wine glass, which splintered on the table, leaving a pool of red wine resembling blood on the white cloth. Dennis glanced up to see what she was staring at. Upon seeing Gretchen, all color drained from his face. "Hello, dear," Gretchen greeted her husband. Her voice remained calm. "Is the business conference progressing favorably?" I reached into my jacket and extracted 2 manila envelopes, positioning one before Brooke and the other before Dennis. "Divorce documents," I told Brooke, adding, "I believe everything is in proper order." "Brandon, I can offer an explanation," she began, but I cut her off. "There isn't one," I responded, "but these can." I retrieved my phone and commenced showing photographs, pictures from Tucker's surveillance, credit card bills, expenditure reports falsely classified, systematically displaying them on the table with a wine stain, one by one. Brooke's hands were quivering. "How did you 18 months?" I replied. 12 trips, $5,000 in fraudulent corporate expenses. Tucker here has meticulously documented everything. Dennis had become completely mute, staring at the papers as if they might ignite spontaneously. Gretchen leaned close to her husband's ear, whispering, "I've already contacted your CFO. Gretchen is due a complete report by Monday morning, and it seems like embezzlement of corporate funds could lead to termination and potential criminal charges." "Gretchen," Dennis began hesitantly. "Don't," she replied firmly, straightening up. "A quarter-century of work, 2 children, a life. Yet you've squandered it for this," she turned towards Brooke. "Feel free to have him, but be aware that there won't be a high salary left to sustain your lifestyle. Dennis is on the brink of losing everything, his job, his standing, his pension. Let's hope he was worth it." Other patrons were now openly observing. The pianist had fallen silent. Every word resonated in the stillness. Brooke was weeping, her makeup streaming down her face. "Brandon, can we discuss this in private?" Brooke pleaded. "Like you discussed our affair privately with your married superior beforehand, before using our funds for romantic vacations. Before deceiving me for 1.5 years." I maintained a steady tone of voice. I vowed not to raise my voice, not to lose self-restraint. "We aren't discussing this privately," she asserted abruptly, tearfully. "You chose privately, now deal with the repercussions publicly. I love him," she declared. However, it wasn't intentional, but I found myself falling for him. "Doesn't that imply—" I glanced at her, truly looked at her. This woman, my wife of 8 years, whom I had stood by through professional transitions, family losses, and the minor battles of constructing a life together. And yet I felt nothing, no resentment, no sorrow, just an overwhelming vacancy. "That signifies you're receiving precisely what you deserve," I replied. We exited without further words. Tucker and Gretchen trailed behind. Behind us echoed Brooke's sobs, Dennis' attempts to console her, the whispers of other diners discussing the spectacle they had just witnessed. We departed from that restaurant, traversed the lodge, and returned to our rental car. Silence reigned until we were back on the mountain road leading to Denver. Gretchen whispered gratitude from the back. "Thank you for giving me presents, for preventing another year of doubt and speculation that would drive me insane." I added, "Thank you for being here. I'm not certain I could have managed it alone." Tucker questioned, "What's next?" I replied, "We wait. The divorce papers are submitted, the evidence is recorded, and on Monday morning, Gretchen submits her report to the CFO. The consequences unfolded sooner than anticipated. Brooke contacted me 17 times that night. I didn't respond. She sent a series of messages expressing regret and accusations of harshness. I blocked her number. Dennis called Gretchen, who answered on speakerphone so Tucker and I could listen. He attempted to apologize, explain, and assure it was over. After 5 minutes of silence, she stated, "I want you out of the house by Sunday. My lawyer will contact you Monday." She hung up. We returned home Saturday morning. Over the weekend, I stayed at my brother's house, reluctant to return home and confront those lingering memories. On Monday, the chief financial officer of Brooke's pharmaceutical firm was presented with a detailed report exposing 18 months of fraudulent expense claims amounting to $45,000. Report contained credit card statements, falsified categorizations on expense reports, and photographic evidence showing Dennis Whitmore and Brooke involved in romantic activities at luxury resorts, which were purported as business trips. The ethics investigation was completed in 4 days. On Thursday, I received a call from my lawyer, Coleman. They were both terminated this morning. The company is planning to press criminal charges for embezzlement, and the district attorney is reviewing the case. However, rather than feeling satisfaction, vindication, or triumph, I felt exhaustion instead. The divorce process moved swiftly afterwards. Brooke had no ground to negotiate, no defense, and no way to argue for any compensation. She engaged in adultery, participated in business fraud, and eroded any positive reputation she may have had. Coleman ensured she comprehended that contesting the divorce would mean all details becoming public court records, thereby complicating her forthcoming criminal defense. She signed the documents without objection. I retained the house, my retirement funds, everything we'd accumulated jointly. She was left with her legal costs and her disgrace. The legal proceedings took longer. Both Brooke and Dennis were indicted for embezzlement and fraud. Dennis, as the main offender with signing privileges on corporate accounts, faced graver charges. His attorney negotiated a plea bargain. Full restitution to the company, 2 years of probation, and permanent revocation of any business licensing credentials were the terms. Brooke's lawyer secured her a similar agreement, but with the inclusion of 300 hours of community service. Gretchen's divorce was finalized 6 months after mine. Gretchen obtained the house, half of Dennis's retirement, and spousal support. Their children backed her up in the matter. It seemed they had already discovered their father's misconduct before Gretchen exposed him. I crossed paths with Dennis approximately 8 months later at a downtown coffee shop. He was secluded at a corner table, engrossed in his laptop. The passage of time had visibly worn him down, with graying hair, weight loss, and a haggard expression that suggested he'd lost everything. When our eyes met, I anticipated he might speak, but instead, he merely nodded once before returning to his computer. Subsequently, I discovered he was employed as a medical equipment company sales trainer, earning only about a third of his previous salary. Brooke relocated to the Midwest, residing in an unknown town there. Word reached me through mutual acquaintances that she was working retail and cohabiting with a roommate, attempting to restart her life from the ground up. I didn't harbor ill will nor goodwill towards her. She had made her own choices. I could coexist with them. Meanwhile, I lingered in the house for an additional year before realizing a new beginning was required. The dwelling held too many recollections, too much past embedded within its walls. I sold it, obtained employment at an engineering firm in North Carolina, relocated to a place where nobody knew my background, refraining from any romantic involvements perhaps eventually. But there's no need for haste. I am learning to trust my intuition once more, learning to identify signs I overlooked before. Learning that someone who genuinely cares for you doesn't deceive for 18 months, doesn't construct a hidden life, doesn't violate every pledge they made. On occasion, people inquire if I repent the manner in which I managed it or if the public showdown was overly severe. I do not. Brooke and Dennis made their decisions in private, forged their affair in secrecy, and anticipated controlling the narrative when it eventually surfaced. I merely ensured they wouldn't have that privilege. You don't get to wreck people's lives and then dictate their reactions. The last time I conversed with Gretchen was approximately a year following the events. She phoned to inform me she had begun dating someone new, a history instructor whom she had encountered at a charity event for museums. She seemed joyful, more lighthearted than I'd ever heard her before. For years, I believed I should strive to keep that marriage intact, she remarked, thinking if I just worked harder, loved him more deeply, he would cease withdrawing. Now I recognize he had already withdrawn, I simply wasn't aware. How does that realization affect you now? I inquired. I feel liberated, she replied. I feel liberated. This statement resonated with me deeply. There's a unique comprehension that emerges from deception once the pain subsides. One sees individuals for their authentic selves rather than idealized versions. One ceases making excuses for unjustifiable actions. One learns that loyalty isn't about unwavering faith, but rather earning and providing trust reciprocally. Previously, I held the notion that marriage entailed unwavering devotion, that one battled for love regardless of the circumstances. However, I now comprehend this is accurate only when both individuals are engaged in combat. When a person is combating while the other deceives, cheats, and steals, it's not a union worth preserving. It's merely exploitation of loyalty. Brooke used to argue that I was excessively trusting, overly eager to see the best in people. Perhaps she was correct. Nevertheless, I prefer to be someone who trusts and occasionally suffers harm rather than someone who deceives and harms others. At least I can still gaze into my mirror without shame. 3 years have passed, making me 36 years old, residing in a different state, engaged in a job that brings me satisfaction. I've established a small group of friends who know my tale and don't regard me as damaged goods. I have a therapist who assisted me in navigating the anger and betrayal without allowing it to corrupt my identity. Clearly, I am not the same individual I was when Brooke and I exchanged vows. In a mountain resort restaurant, that version of me perished while witnessing my wife weep over the repercussions of her actions. From that moment on, I became tougher, wiser, and more cautious, yet somehow more hopeful because I learned a significant lesson that night. You don't have to tolerate deceit. You don't have to be the forgiving one who endures silently as others wreck your life. Instead, you have the right to retaliate, demand fairness, leave, and construct something superior, which is precisely what I chose to do. If you found this narrative engaging, please like and follow Cheating Story Lab. Share your opinions in the comments as I read each one. And keep in mind, trust your intuition. If it seems amiss, probe further. The truth may sting, but it's always preferable to living a falsehood.